Ball screens have become an integral part of modern basketball, and if you don't know how to guard them, you're probably going to be in trouble on the defensive side. Today, we're going to be covering the best ways and different ways to cover ball screens and make sure that your defense is up to date with how to stop that pick and roll action that gets you so many easy buckets on the offensive end. All right, everybody, welcome in today. We are going to be covering ball screen action. There are lots of different ways to cover ball screens. It has really become a staple of the modern basketball game. You know, no matter what becomes popular, whether it's dribble drive or 5-out or different types of actions, there's usually a ball screen thrown in there at some point to free up the offensive player. So we're going to be talking today about, one, some of the different ways to cover a ball screen, and two, what our favorite ways are of doing that. And hopefully you'll get something out of that you can take home and maybe add into your own defensive schemes. So, Augie, let's start off here just by throwing it to you. And we're going to talk specifically about drop coverage. That's going to be our first, way to guard the ball screen. So one, how would you describe drop coverage? What is it? And then if you want to throw maybe some pros and cons about that, and we can kind of discuss that further.
Yeah. Drop coverage has become super popular lately ever since the whole analytical game has come out, and you're starting to see it a lot in the NBA mostly. I have a little bit of a funny story. We played against a team in CIF last year in the playoffs in the semifinals who ran drop coverage. They had a great big, and we ran a lot of ball screens, and they were able to fight over the top with their guard and then drop their big. So basically what it is if I'm guarding the ball, I'm going to fight over the top of the screen. The person who's guarding the screener is going to be off the ball in drop coverage, basically forcing the mid-range jumper. Meaning you might come off that ball screen. If you're able to screen off that guard that's guarding you, it's going to be hard to get all the way to the cup because the big is sitting back there waiting for you to play defense at the rim. So a lot of times you're going to get a mid-range pull-up, and that's why I said that, with the analytics these days, you're forcing teams to shoot these mid-range pull-ups off the dribble, and then the guard's just fighting over and coming to contest from behind, and there's a lot of different offensive reads I think that you could run off it. But I will just say that in our experience in that semifinal game, it was very effective against us. And the thing that I do like about it is that if your guard does a good job fighting over and just getting over it, and there's no screen that even happens, then you're good. And that's essentially what happened to us. Is the screens were poor, our timing was poor waiting for the screen, and the guard was just whoop, right over the top, boom, I'm right here. And we weren't able to get any kind of advantage. So yeah, that's drop coverage. I've played with it a little bit, but it's not one of the main coverages that we use. Yeah,
and I would say some of the strengths of that, you kind of touched on it, but it really allows your big to kind of sit and protect the paint a lot better because they don't have to come up too high. And it forces that mid-range shot, which, like you said, analytically, a lot of people would say is not the highest percentage shot on the court. I've seen, some weaknesses is, I would say, for if you have like a really skilled shooter who's off the dribble, just nails, they'll get to their spots even in the mid-range and knock it down. And a really good point guard will come off that screen in the drop coverage and they'll just pull from three. And, if they're really good at that, they can knock down shots easily. But again, how common is that? Probably not super common. And I'd say, especially at the high school level, definitely not as common. But you also have to have great communication because you've got to have the timing right. When that big's coming up, you've got to make sure you're calling that screen. Obviously, anytime there's a screen set, you've got to have great communication. But I think drop coverage, you really got to be on it because if you're a little bit late on that drop, that point guard's going to turn the corner and there's going to be nobody there and they're just going to blow by and get to the rim. So you've got to really be on your game when it comes to the communication side about that in drop coverage. So
I remember a game that you were at, one of ours, when we played Rigetti. I don't know if you remember, but they killed us with some ball screens. And we essentially were running drop coverage that game. And the reason that I thought it was poor or that I didn't like it was like the ball screens that they were setting on us were empty-sided ball screens, meaning, it was on the wing and there was no help in the corner. So that guard was coming off that screen. Our big was in drop, but they were getting all the way to the basket and engaging the big. So the big's going to protect the rim, right? And then dishing it right to the big rolling on that empty side. So it was like, we were making 2-guard-1. So I would say for me, I don't like drop coverage on those empty sided ball screens at all, just from personal experience. But I do think that works better in the middle of the floor, maybe where like if your big does have to engage because the guard gets all the way to the rim, then at least you have some help defense that can, help the helper on the.
Yeah. And that makes sense. I can understand that. And that's another thing that I guess we haven't touched on yet, maybe we will the further we get into this, is different types of ways to guard screens depending on where the ball is at, right? I've run stuff in the past where I run, something on the top of the key. We run a certain type of coverage. On the wings, we run something different, right? So that can be done. I think it can be a little more complex, obviously, but if you can do that, it can be really good at hiding the weaknesses in any of those spots, right? So, but that's something, like I said, we can get into a little bit more later when we talk about the different coverages. So that's one. We got drop coverage. So let's talk about the second one here. I would say one of maybe like the kind of the old school ones, at least in my head, is hedge and recover. Okay, so what's a hedge and recover? And let's talk about like a hard hedge, because I know there's a flat hedge. I almost liken that to drop coverage. It's not exactly the same, but it's kind of similar principles. So let's talk about a hard hedge and recover.
So hard hedge and recover. So if I'm guarding the screener, when that ball handler comes off, I'm going to hard hedge and almost trap the basketball. I kind of describe it as like a closeout. You're going to like do a hard closeout on the basketball, send him as far back to half court in a backwards direction as possible. And then the guy that's guarding the ball should, at least the way that I understand it, it should fight over the screen and then under the hedge. And then at that point, call the hedge back. Hey, get back. I'm here. And then you recover all the way back to the roller. The guy that was hedging recovers all the way back to his man on the roller. And I would say that the weak side defense is a lot of times called the tag, right? The tag has got to hit that roller, make sure. So there's definitely some help the hedger in this situation that is supposed to happen on the weak side, and that's hedging.
Yeah, and I think you described that perfectly. The tag concept, and what I was thinking about when you were talking about this is with hedge and recover, you have to have a lot of weak side help. I mean, you really have to commit. And when you run it, do you, or if you've run it or seen it run before, do they usually tag like all the way over, no matter what? Or is it more like they're in help and kind of like, jumping a little bit more to the ball side, cheating a little bit more, but not fully committing to like a deny? Like, how do you usually teach that, or how have you seen that taught before?
Yeah, I would say that it's more of like being close enough to where if they do pass it, that you can take him. Like you're going to rotate onto him. Like you're not just going to bluff and get back. Like you're in the position where if he catches it, boom, you're right there to even take a charge, to use your arm bar to kind of stand him up a little bit. That's how I would teach it, at least. And we've done all these ball screen coverages at some point over the years, but hedge and recover has never been one of my main coverages. And yeah, I just think, for me, the reason that I don't like it so much is it does put you in some sort of rotation. It does kind of make that tag guy come over and you're leaving your shooter open or whoever else is open in that corner. And like I try to stay out of rotations as much as possible. That's why I don't like it. I think it's hard to guard too. Like if you have a good point guard, they're splitting it and they're getting around that big hedge. I think it's going to put a lot of fouls on your bigs. And I guess those would be the cons that I can think of.
Yeah, I think it makes definitely, like you said, you can get your bigs in foul trouble. I think also it requires a little bit more effort from the big because they've got to come high. And I think depending on the big you have, it can be effective or maybe not so effective. Like if you've got a very quick athletic big who can move his feet really well, I think hedge and recover can be effective because a really good hedge and recover is constantly pushing those guards back towards half court, and that can be annoying if you're on the offensive side. You're like, dang, I can't ever turn the corner. I can't get into our action. But if you're slow-footed as a big, I think that's where it's tough to run the hedge and recover because, like you said, even if they're in position, they're going to be a little slower and they're probably going to get that corner turned on them. I think that's one of the key points is like, can your big move their feet and can they get up there quick enough? I remember I always think back to, it was UCLA during their Final Four runs in like the mid 2000s when they went to like 3 or 4 Final Fours in a row, and they would hedge and recover like seriously to half court. I remember watching games and they would hedge and recover and their bigs would do it and they'd recover all the way back and they were good at it, but they also had bigs that could move their feet and could slide and, were lanky and could cover ground. And not everyone has that luxury, right? So it just kind of depends on what you've got. But yeah, I think hedge and recover, I feel like, I could be wrong, but I feel like that's one of the like original oldest ways to guard a ball screen. And, there obviously have been new ones that have come out since then, which we're going to get to here in a moment. So that's our second one. We got hedge and recover. And then now let's talk on our third one, which in a lot of ways is kind of the simplest one, is just switching screens. So what's a switch look like?
Yeah, so when the screen is coming, the guy that's guarding the screener is going to switch onto the ball, and the guy that's guarding the ball is going to switch onto the screener, obviously. And I think there's different ways to teach this, and this is what I do like. I do like switching, and to me, like same thing as before, like it helps you stay out of any kind of rotation. Right, so now you're not having to help or anything. You can just boom, switch it, and basically, if they set 5 ball screens and you just switch, then imagine guarding 5 ball screens in a possession trying to hedge. That's pretty tough. Something is definitely going to go wrong at some point. I think with switching, it's just so cut and clear that you can just get good at it. And it definitely has its cons, but I have my opinions on that as well. Yeah, so the way that we teach it is actually, we teach our guy that's going to switch onto the roller to go under the roller and around. It's a little bit different than what I've seen like online or a couple places where people teach the guy to go kind of stay on the top side and kind of play a little deny. But I don't like that roller getting on the underneath us for any reason. And I'd rather go underneath and risk maybe getting that roller kind of leg whipping you and locking you in behind him. Like I'll just tell our guards to just get under that thing and around it. And we're in pretty good position if we do that.
I tend to agree with you on that. When I teach switching, I don't want to be over the top because to me, you can get that reverse steal really easily if you get stuck on the backside for whatever reason. So I would prefer to stay under as well. Again, maybe the level of play that you're coaching at might change that rule, but I think more often you'll get stuck if you're on the high side in a bad position than if you're underneath. Because you can always get help. If you got a big on a little, then if they're trying to post you, at least you're between them and the basket, and someone can come over and help you, and now you got a double team, and then you can rotate out of that. And like, there's just ways to fix it. Where to me, I'm like, if you got a little guard on the top side of a 6'6", 6'7" guy, there's nothing they can do. Unless you fully commit to a double on the backside, but then you're leaving someone wide open. So I think that's a recipe for a layup most of the time. I go back and forth on switching. I like it. I like switching guards. So I love switching like 1 through 3, maybe even 1 through 4. I'm hesitant on 1 through 5, and I think some of that is maybe that old school mentality of the weakness of the mismatch, right? But then I sometimes think about it and I'm like, how often is a high school player going to really take advantage of that mismatch all game long? Like, how often are they going to be able to kill you on that? There are teams that can, but I think a lot of teams, they get excited, they get a little rush to get that ball in there, and now they're trying to force themselves into a mismatch, which realistically most teams don't practice that like a ton, and so now they're not running their offense, they're just trying to feed this mismatch constantly. And unless you got a great player that can just dominate, I think I kind of agree with you, it can be not as effective as you might think compared to like the NBA level, where one guy can just go give you 40 on a mismatch, or even a really good college player can do that. So if I'm guessing that's where you're like, those cons may not be as strong as people point them out to be. Is that kind of your feeling as well?
Yeah, pretty much. As a point guard, like from what I've seen, like when a point guard switches onto a big, like it's hard for the big. I don't know what it is. Like, yeah, if they get their 2 feet planted underneath the basket and get a cash there, they're going to score. But like, for whatever reason, you point guards get all pissed off and put a forearm right in their back, dude, and all of a sudden start D'ing them up like crazy. And like you said, if the other team like wants to get it in there, like it kills their offense, man. It just gets so stagnant a lot of times, unless they're really good. I worry more about my big switching onto a good guard. That's the part that I do worry about. But you can send help or whatever. And same with the big inside, you can double, like you said. For me, switching also gives you like ball pressure, because like we don't switch and sit back. That's a big mistake. Like if you switch into like drop coverage, then that guard's going to come off and shoot that 3 like every time, right? You imagine you come off a screen, it's switch. Now the guy that's guarding me is way down there. Like that's an easy pull up 3. But we like to switch like hard, aggressively. And so you get a little bit of that, like kind of like that hedge mentality a little bit. Like I said, I worry about the big guard and the guard, but at the same time, it's the same kind of challenge, right? The big switches on the guard. You got a 6'5" guy on you. Yeah, you're probably quicker, but you might settle for a jumper with a 6'5" guy contesting your shot, and that's not a good shot for them. So just last little caveat is like all these coverages are great. Like if you're like a good hedging team is going to D up the pick and roll a lot better than a poor switching team, or it's what's cool about basketball is like, what's your flavor, like what's your style, and everyone just does it different.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point there. By the way, for anyone listening, when Augie was talking about the pissed off little point guard, he was 100% talking about me as the guy getting rolled on and me just getting pissed off. And I 100% know what you're talking about. And you're absolutely right. Little point guards are like, oh, what? Like mouse in the house. Now I got to play.
Exactly. Hey, for real. Like,
disrespect me.
I've probably definitely seen you do it a couple times, but like I've seen a lot of guards do it. Like when they switch onto that big, man, like it's hard for that big all of a sudden. I don't know what it is. It's just because they're quicker and then like, yeah, like, oh, you're going to post me up, like you're getting that arm in the back, you know?
Yeah, I think probably it's that personal challenge, right? You get switched on and you're like, oh, you think you're going to take advantage of me? It's, and you're going to try and pick on me. And now that fires me up to want to play harder, right? So I definitely get what you're talking about. All right, let's talk the next one here. We got blitzing or trapping screens. So what's that look like?
I like blitzing, and that's where you're basically, trapping the screen. So as he comes off, you're going to put 2 on the ball, force a turnover, get a deflection, and it's just a typical trap normally. And like I said, I do like blitzing the ball screen because I feel like it's an opportunity to force a turnover. It's disruptive. Like a couple of times we've trapped ball screens like in the first quarter and they didn't run another ball screen the whole game, And so I think that's a great strategy. It's just a little scary. It's a little risky. Typically the way that we do it is the tag, of course, we want the tag to take the roller. But if it's an empty-sided ball screen, then it's basically kind of like your bottom of the hole, your fire help under the basket help guy that's going to take that roller. Puts you in rotation, and if the offense is good, they're going to make you pay.
Yeah, and I would say that blitzing a ball screen is almost like the extreme version of a hedge, right? Because you've got both players up there. The only difference on the hedge in a blitz is that big retreats back. If the big stays, you're already in position, right? And so blitzing a screen can be great. I think the rotation and the help has to be even stronger than on the hedge because there's nobody coming, right? Like you've got to be able to cover that role. And sometimes the trap's not there perfectly and they're able to get it through. So I totally get how it can be a little risky. If it's done well, it can be super disruptive. I remember my very first year coaching, we played a team, we were running a ball screen offense. And they were way more talented than us, and they were the number 1 team in the league, and we were number 2. And we played them at our place, and it ended up being like a 4 or 5 point game, and they struggled to guard our ball screens. Like we were picking them apart, and to be honest, we had no business really being in that game, and we almost won. Then we played them at their place, and they just completely changed how they guarded it, and they just blitzed everything, and we lost by like 30. And that was when you could see like the difference in the talent, and like they adjusted to what we were doing. We weren't ready for that, but that's they actually practiced it and were effective at it, and because we weren't prepared for that, we thought they were going to kind of do something similar. It changed the whole game, and it went from a 5-point game to a 30-point game. So I would say a good blitz can be super effective, but I think you have to practice it. Like you have to obviously practice all of this stuff, but I think switching can be picked up easier. I think the concept of switching can be picked up easier. Trapping out of a ball screen is not as simple. And if you don't practice it and you just kind of throw it in randomly, I think it'll actually hurt you a lot more than if you just ran with your traditional defense. I don't know if you agree with that. But
no, I totally agree with that. Yeah, it definitely is the one you have to practice. Well, there might be one more on the list that's coming up soon that might take a little bit more practice. But this one, blitzing, does take a lot of practice. And offensively, like from what I've seen, like last season or last summer, the team trapped all of our ball screens and it hurt us, but now so I'm like, okay, yeah, we need to fix that. So basically you want to hit the short roll. Like you want to roll into kind of into space right there. Like if you roll all the way to the basket and the guard's getting trapped, they're not going to be able to throw it to you like under the basket. But if you just kind of pop into like space right there and just turn and get a catch, boom, like I said, now the defense is in rotation. You can just move the ball, keep the advantage. You should get a shot, but yeah, it's easier said than done. You got to know that trap's coming. If it just happens, then it's tough. But yeah, I do like it, and something you got to practice. And I will say that it's a great defense when you're going against a team that has like one superstar, right? That's coming off. You want to get it out of his hands. Uses all the ball screens, the point guard, whatever he is. Like just trap him every time and make him give it up, and at least the ball's out of his hands.
Yeah, and there are different ways you can do that, and this kind of leads into our next one here. But you can trap it super hard, or you can almost trap it where that big is kind of showing flat. Again, it's almost like a drop coverage. We're showing flat, and you're almost like just kind of corralling him, you know what I mean? With that guard coming over the top. And so it's still that trapping action, but it's more just like containment and just, okay, now he's got to get rid of it. Because that's the other thing. If you trap too hard with a really good ball handler, and let's say your big's not quick enough, like then he'll beat him over the top, or he'll split it or something like that. That's the danger on that. So you just got to kind of know what you can and can't do with that. But that leads me into our last one here, which is how to ice screens. And I would say this is a relatively newer concept in the basketball world. And what I mean by that is, I don't know, maybe 10 years that people have been icing screens. Maybe it's a little longer, and I don't know, but I feel like it got popular within the last like 10 years or so. And icing a screen is something that I've seen some teams do very effectively, and then I've seen it be done where teams try it and it doesn't work so well because they haven't really mastered it. And when you I think alluded to this about it being a more difficult one to master. So why don't you talk us through what icing a screen is?
Yeah, so icing a screen is where you don't let the offense use the screen. So if I'm getting a screen to my right, onto my right side, like I'm going to position my body so that the person with the ball has to reject the screen and drive the other direction. And then the person who's guarding the screen is basically down there in help. They're going to kind of corral him. It's almost like drop coverage to me, to the weak side or something like that, to the other side of the ball screen. And then the way that we do it is, once the offensive player that's guarding the ball, the guard, once he gets back to the ball, he calls the other big back. And then on the top side, when that big kind of rolls into space, everyone else is basically the tag. So you got tags just like in the hedge and recovery stuff. And yeah, I do think that is a great coverage. I like that coverage too. Like my top three is like switching, blitzing, icing, and that same Rigetti team that killed us with the empty-sided ball screens and drop coverage, we started icing them the next time we played them, and we've pretty much iced them since. And it's been way more effective for us. I've never tried it for ball screens on the center of the court, like in the middle third. But I do like it a lot for the wing ball screens, for those empty-sided ones where they can just hit those rollers all day. I like sending it to the corner, and there's a little bit of a trap that can happen too sometimes down there, and then everyone on the top side just kind of tagging the big who's popping into space. And yeah, I like icing.
Yeah, I think it also forces, again, kind of an analytically low percentage shot, which is that mid-range, because the only thing it gives up is a mid-range on the big rolling, and catching and turning and taking that shot, which is not just in general, I think it's kind of a hard shot to hit. I don't care if it's analytics or not. I think it's just a hard shot to hit. So it forces that. We used to ice a lot. My first few years, we iced and used it specifically on the wings. Top of the key, there was a time where I was always taught, like, you don't ice on the top of the key because it doesn't really work. But then I know some teams started to try it. I remember seeing some European teams, EuroLeague teams running it, and they would ice a specific way, and then they would send it in. But then they also would have like 7-footers down there kind of waiting, And so it's like, well, is that something that only works because they have that, And I've never toyed with that to know. But my fear is in the middle of the court, like you're basically giving that guard a downhill attack straight to the basket, So for me, I don't really like that idea. But yeah, the ice on the wings, like if you do it right, man, there were some times we used it and we ran it so well, and it was like a team literally could not get a ball screen off. The problem is, especially in high school, I feel like you don't get enough practice time to just like focus on that, or you don't play enough teams. That was what we ran into, and that's why I kind of got away from icing. Is I didn't play enough teams that use ball screens on the wings, and maybe that's just a girls' basketball issue. We don't see that as often, maybe as we see it on the men's side. But man, we would practice ice every day, for like all season long, and then 2 teams would run wing ball screens, and I'm like, I just spent like 50 hours this year on ice, and I used it in 2 games. Was it really worth it? We used to ice the wings and hedge the top, and that could be, it was good when we ran it right. But then most teams either didn't run a ball screen or they ran it from the top. And so I kind of got away from icing screens just because I rarely see wing ball screens. And I don't know, maybe you see them a lot more, but it's something that I was like, well, the efficiency for me, the time and effort to put in to be good at it wasn't worth how much we were getting out of it.
No, that makes a ton of sense. I think that's a mistake that a lot of coaches make is we've talked about before, you spend all year on the set play that you run like one time all year. It's like your 4th set play or something. You spend all this time and then you never run it. But yeah, man, icing ball screens really does blow up those ball screens in a major way. I can see why it kind of got popular and stuff. But yeah, it does. You're right. The time investment is huge on it. And so, yeah, I would like to mention one more thing too about guarding ball screens. And I don't know what your opinion of this is, but it's maybe one of the most important things. But we like to teach players that are guarding the ball in a ball screen to force the ball into the screen for most coverages. I would say for switching, for trapping, for hedging, for drop. Yeah, all of them. Like you kind of switch your feet, force them into the screen so that the offensive player can't reject the screen and get downhill. So do you teach that too?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it also, not only does it not allow them to reject and get downhill, but it makes them like, they have to make that decision. So now you don't have to make a different decision, which obviously I guess is part of what you were talking about. But when you force that ball handler to use the screen, it's like, okay, this is now going to happen, and so I do this, and I think it simplifies things for the defense.
No, that's a good point. It does makes it way simple. Yeah, this conversation, I after that game we had against North Bakersfield last year where they were in drop covers. They had this great big and pretty quick guards, and they just fought over those screens. Like, a big part of me is considering just working on that a little bit more because, man, if you can just fight over that. And dude, when we play pickup, you seem like you're a guy that likes to just fight over ball screens. Is that right? Or is yeah.
Yeah. That's because I was always taught that. I was always taught hedge and recover, get over the top.
And yeah, I mean, there's a valid point, I think, to like, if you can just fight over the top and just get your little arm bar on their waist as they go over and just fight over, and like, then you don't have to switch. You don't have to do anything. There's nothing that has to happen. And like, to me, that's the ultimate, right? We're talking about staying out of rotation, not having to tag and all this other kind of stuff. Like, dude, if you could just fight over the top of it, like, that's the holy grail right there. But I also think that you're at risk of just getting picked off, and now you are in rotation as your big has to help. So I don't know. Maybe something to play with a little bit.
There's a pro and con. I think, like you said, the main thing is like the timing. I know when I was playing, if the big was able to hedge or just show or whatever, drop, whatever, for a split second, just enough for me to get back on that guard's hip, I felt good about that. What sucked was when the big kind of left me out to dry, and then my man's burning into the basket, and now it looks like I'm not playing defense, and that can be frustrating. But if the communication piece is there and that big is showing and the timing is right, it can be very effective whether you're dropping, like you said, or hedging or whatever. Because getting over the top keeps you, like you said, from rotating, having to get a mismatch, whatever it is. So that is definitely a plus side to it.
I really honestly can't think of any other coverages other than just like some random coverages, like some peel and switch type weird kind of new age stuff that I've only seen in videos, not even in real life. But can you think of any other kind of coverages?
Not off the top of my head. I mean, I feel like those are the main 5. There's probably something we're missing, and if someone has happened to be listening or watching and is like, oh, what about this? Like, let us know, and maybe we missed it this week. But I feel like those are the 5 staples of on-ball screens, because I mean, that pretty much covers everything. You're switching your players, you're doubling it, you're hedging it. I mean, anything else, you'd be sitting in like some type of a zone, right? And you're not doing that in a man-to-man defense. So, yeah. Well, I guess my question is, before we kind of wrap things up, is I think you mentioned it earlier. You might have already told us, but what are your favorites? Like, if you were to rank them, how do you rank your favorites here?
I would probably say my favorite's switching, just because, like you said, it's so easy to like just put in. I would say my second would be icing, because blows up the ball screen every single time, and the other team can literally not run the ball screen that they practiced their whole year for. And then I also like trapping or blitzing, because it gives you the opportunity, like, oh, you're going to set a ball screen on us? All right, well, you better be able to get out of this trap and force those turnovers that I love to force, as well as being able to take the ball out of the best player's hands. So I would say those are my 3 favorite, but I do want to throw in drop as my bonus that I want to experiment with.
Okay. So mine is somewhat similar, but I actually like hedge and recover. I still like that, and I think that one, if it's done right, can be really effective. I like that in switching. Switching is probably like almost there. Like they're so close. I think I just need to trust switching more often. I think in my head I still have that kind of old school of like you don't want mismatches, But that's something I want to try experimenting more with. I mean, I use switching and we've used it in the past, but I kind of want to get heavier into that. And then I would say trapping a screen is probably my 3rd favorite. Again, I like ice, but I just don't get a lot of use out of it for myself right now with the team that I have, or with who we're playing against, I should say. And then drop coverage, I've never used it a whole lot, and my only fear is, again, just a good shooter being able to get off that screen and knock down shots. But maybe that's a kind of I'd say a rational fear, and it's like, how many teams really have a guard that can make that shot consistently? So maybe I need to play with that more, but those are my 3 favorites. And I think if one thing that I will say, if you're listening, you get something out of this, is whatever you feel comfortable in and whatever you think you can teach the best to your kids, go with it. Like, it's not, I think a lot of times in basketball, people will tell you, you've got to do this, and if you don't do this, you're wrong. And I just don't agree with that. I think that's incorrect. It's like, well, we've talked about shooting form before, and well, you got to have a 90-degree elbow, and then you got to have this, and you got to have your arm here. And it's like, well, if that was the case, then all the best shooters' shots would look exactly the same. And if you look at Steph Curry, and you look at Ray Allen, and you look at Reggie Miller, their shots look nothing alike, right? But what they have are pieces that are very similar, right? Like, they've got pieces of it that are all the same, and then from there, there's some variety. I would say anything in basketball is that way. If you're good at hedging, great, do it. If you're good at switching, great, do it. Find that what works for you and your team, and I think you'll probably be successful.
I'm
guessing, Og, you probably would echo those sentiments as well.
Totally. That's what I love about basketball is everyone's different styles, and it doesn't matter what you do. Everything works and nothing works.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. Everything works and nothing works. And sometimes it feels like nothing works.
Yeah.
That's the hard part. So, all right. Well, on that note, let's wrap this thing up. Thank you guys so much for watching. We appreciate you. If you are watching on YouTube, make sure to click that like and subscribe. If you're listening on some audio podcast form, you can follow us there as well. Hopefully you got something out of this episode and learned a little bit on how to defend the ball screen action. And other than that, we will see you guys in the next video.